Hi, and welcome to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation focused on youth mental health. Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to let you all know that all content that is found in our podcast is created for informational purposes only. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, treatment, or therapy. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition, and never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard in this podcast. Thank you so much, and without further ado, let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving. Today, we will be talking about stress and how to manage it, this time from a therapist perspective. My name is Sirit, and we have a very special guest, Deborah Lafon Spada, a licensed psychotherapist. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah LaFon Spada. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I have a private psychotherapy practice.
That's impressive. Now, let's get on with the questions. To begin, what's your medical definition of stress?
Okay. The Oxford Dictionary defines stress as a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. So, similar to stress, people talk about pressure, worry, anxiety, hassle. Those are all things that are really similar way of describing stress.
Thanks for explaining. Now, we often confuse and mix up stress and anxiety. Could you tell us what the difference is?
Sure. They're similar, and it can be really confusing because they can actually exist together. And sometimes it's difficult to differentiate what's what. But stress can create anxiety, can also exacerbate anxiety if someone's already anxious. However, anxiety is a little different because it tends to be more chronic and persistent. And the thing about anxiety that's different than stress is that it can remain even in the absence of any identified stressor. So someone can be anxious and they don't even really know why. Stress typically is more transient and it's related to a known stressor. So something's coming up that's stressful, then once that stress is gone, the anxiety is no longer there. So there's a couple of types of anxiety I think it's important to make note of. The one that typically goes with stress is, I call it sort of expected anxiety. That's not a real term, but just to differentiate, expected anxiety is when something's coming up that's stressful, but it also creates anxiety. For example, if there's a big test coming up, then there's stress worrying about studying or what kind of grade you're going to get. But then there's also anxiety about just the test in general. Clinical anxiety is what the anxiety I referred to earlier, which is anxiety that is present pretty much all the time. And there's really not any known stressor or any known reason for the anxiety to be there, to be present.
Okay, so to summarize, basically, stress is being stressed because there's a known stressor, while chronic anxiety is being anxious even without something bothering or like a stressor, right?
Yes, right. That's right.
Okay, let's jump to our next segue. In your practice, what are some common stressors for people?
So, what I see a lot, especially with teenagers and especially in Silicon Valley, school is typically the number one stressor. So, there's so much competition and there's so much pressure to excel that school is a stressor. Tests, homework, et cetera, stressors, extracurricular, even though they can be fun, again, there's a lot of competition with extracurriculars. So, that can be really stressful. For adults, oftentimes it's work related or relationships. Something maybe there's financial pressures, also relationships or pressures, even friendships in schools, like that can cause tremendous stress as well. So there isn't just one source of stress. Comes in a variety of forms, and there's lots of things in life, unfortunately, that cause stress or that can create stress.
Yeah, like for me, it's school, homework, and extracurriculars, like you mentioned.
Right.
So, what are some symptoms that we all feel in our bodies when we're stressed?
So I think there's a couple of things to pay attention to. It's not always just physical symptoms, but those definitely are present with stress. But there are mental health or there's emotional symptoms that can come up as well, and behavioral symptoms. So physical symptoms, what I hear a lot, people complain of, gosh, my muscles really ache or my back hurts. People complain of headaches, stomach aches, a general feeling of malaise, meaning like just don't feel well, just don't feel good and tired, just really tired, because stress creates a lot of cortisol in your body. So the cortisol levels, when those spike, it's extremely difficult to maintain that for extended period of time. So it can create a sense of exhaustion. Mental health or behavioral emotional symptoms are irritability is the one that I see the most. So people are just kind of normally might be even tempered, snap more quickly, have arguments, get into fights with their mom or their dad or their sister, or they get into arguments with their friends or family. Those are really common, or just being kind of more grumpy, more withdrawn. Those are all things to really pay attention to. That's kind of your body's and your mind's signal to you like, hey, pay attention to me. Something's not right. Like we need to figure out what's going on here.
Yeah, I've noticed that my heartbeat increases when I'm stressed.
Very much. Yes.
Yeah. Now, do you have any recommendations you have for me and our audience for better equipping ourselves and preparing for managing our stress?
I think it's really important to be proactive with stress, because stress is a part of life, right? If there's always going to be something stressful. So starting out, it's really good to practice good self-care. And what that means is just making sure you have a really good daily routine of getting up on time and going to bed on time. Good sleep is super important for managing sleep. Making sure you're eating and drinking water, getting out in nature, that's really important. Also, life is super stressful. There are lots of demands on our time, but having downtime is super important, and having fun time, doing things that you enjoy and that you look forward to. Those are all really helpful ways of managing stress.
That makes sense. They're great prevention strategies. Now, what should we do in the heat of the moment? Any tips?
So I think the heat of the moment is to sort of segue to what we talked about a little bit before, is to be proactive in managing it. But in the moment, if you notice that you're feeling really stressed, if you can step away, or just even even if you're sitting somewhere, take a couple of minutes to check in with yourself, like, what's going on with me? What is triggering these feelings of stress? And some things that are really useful are to use visualization. So visualize something really peaceful, take some deep breaths and relax. Sometimes if you have the opportunity, go out, get in nature, take a walk, talk to other people, and even sometimes just doing some mindless thing, watching something funny on TV, listening to some soothing music. It's just really personal to each individual what is most relaxing or what's most useful in managing stress. But it's important to sort of just check in with yourself and taking some deep breaths, cleansing and sort of clearing your mind and helping yourself in that moment, sort of just figure out what's going on and how you can redirect that.
Wow, I'm definitely going to try these. Lastly, what should we do when we are unable to manage that stress?
It's a really good question. And so I think that if you notice you've tried lots of strategies, you're getting good sleep, you're making sure you're having a good daily schedule, you get out and spend some time, have some physical movement in nature, you're taking good care of yourself, you're enjoying activities, and you're still unable to manage stress. And that's a really good time. If you're a teen or if you're a child, talk to your parents and say, hey, like, I'm really struggling with this. And maybe that would be a good time to talk to someone, to speak to a professional. Oftentimes at schools, they have counselors on school sites. So ask your mom and dad. They might be able to get you in with a school counselor. And if you can't do that, you can see someone outside of school that can help you and give you, we're just talking very general strategies. This is a very broad sort of topic that we have today, but there's really specific things that each individual person can do. And if you work together with a therapist, that would be really helpful, because you can figure out what's going on with you and have some really good proactive strategies, because that's always better, if you can, to proactively deal with stress or anything else that's going on rather than reactive. It's a little bit harder to deal with that. For adults, it's the same thing. If you notice that you tried all different strategies, you're using healthy coping skills, you have a supportive group around you, meaning friends, family, et cetera, work, things are going well in your life, but you're still struggling with stress, then it's okay to reach out for help. And that would be what I would recommend. Seek professional help. It can be really useful to talk to someone and have someone be able to give you a different perspective, to give you some feedback, to give you support and help you navigate the stress and be able to move through it.
Wow. Thank you so much, Deborah, for the brilliant responses and definitions. I'm committed to put these in action. In summary, we discussed that chronic anxiety is being stressed when there's no defined stressor, whereas stress is having a known stressor. We also talked about some really awesome ways of managing stress in the moment for prevention and if we're unable to cope with the stress. Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.
You are listening to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation. As part of our youth series, we will be releasing new episodes every Friday, so make sure to continue to check those out. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and thank you so much for listening.